Monaco 1967. The bright red Ferrari enters the narrow chicane at almost top speed. The driver, 31-year-old Lorenzo Bandini, really should have known better. Just a year earlier, whilst working as a technical advisor for the movie Grand Prix, he had told the filmmakers where and how the film should portray a realistic crash. He suggested the chicane du Port as the most likely spot for a fatal incident, describing a high-speed loss of control through the chicane and a tumbling wreck along the harbour front. Unbeknownst to him, he had basically just described his own death. Lorenzo Bandini was born in Libya in December 1935. At that time, Libya was under Italian control, but the family moved back to Italy during the war. His father died, leaving the family financially destitute, and young Lorenzo stepped up. At age 14, he got a job as an apprentice mechanic, working at a garage in Milan which was owned by a former racing driver, and it was here that Bandini was bitten by the racing bug. From that moment on, he had a dream: to race for Ferrari in Formula 1. No easy feat for a 14-year-old apprentice mechanic, but he stuck to his dream and plugged away at it, racing any car he could get his hands on anytime he could, and by 1958 he was competing in Formula Junior. This was very encouraging, as Formula Junior was seen by the big racing teams as a great place for spotting up-and-coming talent. In 1961 he was considered for a place with Ferrari, but Bandini wasn't chosen. Ferrari instead picked Giancarlo Baghetti. Not a bad choice for Ferrari, as Baghetti went on to produce the extraordinary feat of winning his debut race, which was the 1961 French Grand Prix. Bandini had to wait until 1962 to get signed up, and even then his initial role was more of a support driver, but he was building his reputation within the team as a reliable and versatile racer. He made his first notable finish in 1963, winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans alongside Ludovico Scarfiotti. Now this pairing's interesting, as it highlights just how unusual Bandini was for a Ferrari driver of this era. Scarfiotti was from a wealthy aristocratic family. His grandfather was one of the founders of Fiat, and his politician father was already an amateur racer. Joining Ferrari as a gentleman racer was almost a foregone conclusion for him. Contrast that to Bandini, the penniless grease monkey from a backstreet Milanese garage. And yet the two men got on. In fact, Bandini seems to have gotten along with almost everyone. He didn't have a massive ego. The mechanics liked him as he understood the technical side, as he had been a mechanic himself, and the public loved him as he was one of them, a working-class lad done good, pulled himself up by his own bootstraps to race for Ferrari. And Enzo Ferrari, a man sometimes portrayed as an almost ruthless godfather-type character in the way he ran the team, apparently thought of Bandini like a son. So he must have been doing something right, and in 1963 his future at Ferrari must have indeed looked bright. However, the next couple of years were a bit of a mixed bag for Bandini, and although his reputation inside Ferrari was growing, viewed from the outside, it was easy to see Bandini as a promising driver, but one that failed to deliver. He was regularly making podium finishes, but never as the winner. He was often the race leader, but then had to retire early due to mechanical problems. Eventually, he won the Austrian Grand Prix in August of 1964. This was to be the only Grand Prix win of his career. Earlier in that same year at Monaco, he had looked like he was in contention for a strong finish, but he was ordered to drop back to let teammate John Surtees go ahead. In the event, Surtees did not finish. He went out with gearbox trouble on lap 15, and Bandini limped around for 68 laps before his gearbox gave out too. In fact, out of the 23 cars that entered, only 5 managed to go the full distance, and for 1960s Formula 1, that wasn't considered abnormal. Now, it's worth pausing here just for a second to talk about how physically punishing a race like this could be for the cars and for the men that drove them. The Monaco course in the 1960s was much tighter and far less forgiving than the modern version. Drivers had to contend with narrow streets flanked by steep stone walls, metal marine bollards and iron lamp posts at the side of the track, harbour walls which fell directly off into the sea, raised curbs, dark tunnels followed by blinding glare, and in terms of protection, not much more than a few straw bales, sandbags and tyres dotted around the track. The circuit constantly changed rhythm, plunging drivers from the darkness of the tunnel into blinding Mediterranean sunlight before throwing them through tight chicanes, followed by uphill sections, cambered corners, uneven surfaces, slow hairpin bends that immediately opened up into hard acceleration zones. All the while the drivers were dealing with deafening noise, breathing in fumes, and sitting in an open cockpit whilst 20 other odd guys chased you down for every split second of time. And you had to do this for 100 laps. It's no wonder that drivers regularly lost up to 5 kilograms in body weight over a single race weekend. Then it wasn't much easier on the cars. Gearboxes, steering, suspension, clutch, brakes were constantly being punished by the track. There were no electronic paddles on the steering wheels, no power steering, no air conditioning, no automatic gearboxes. It was just the constant attrition of the track against the car. On average, drivers changed gear manually every 3 seconds. Brake, downshift, brake, corner, accelerate, shift up, brake, accelerate, corner. And you repeat this thousands and thousands of times and just hope that nothing goes wrong. And so by lap 80, you can imagine how the drivers must have been feeling. Physically exhausted, mentally drained, and yet still needing absolute concentration for every second. After all, they were essentially sitting inside a thin aluminium shell wrapped around fuel tanks in a massive engine, and they were wearing little more than cotton overalls and a glorified motorbike helmet, weaving these machines through narrow streets at close to 150 miles an hour. One slip, and it's game over. By the time the 1967 Monaco GP rolled around, the pressure on Bandini to do well must have been immense. He had just won races at Daytona and Monza, and he had placed second in Monaco in 1965, beaten only by Mr. Monaco himself, the unstoppable Graham Hill. So this year was maybe third time lucky. Bandini by nature was modest, down to earth and grounded, and he certainly didn't promote himself as the saviour of Italian motor racing, but that didn't stop the groundswell of support which had built up around him. The Italians, passionate about the sport, hadn't had a world champion since Alberto Ascari, and that was 13 years earlier. For the Italian fans, the sight of a humble, likeable, working-class Italian driver racing a Ferrari must have been almost too much to hope for. You know, it was a kind of, this guy just has to win type sentiment. At any rate, Bandini wasn't going to give up at Monaco at the first sign of trouble. He was going to push it, he was in it to win it, and this was going to be his year. Bandini started second behind Jack Brabham, but quickly overtook him to get out in front. Brabham dropped out almost immediately when his engine blew up, spraying oil all over the track. As Bandini came around on lap 2, he skidded in this, almost crashing, and in the confusion, Denny Hulme and Jackie Stewart slipped past him. Bandini had dropped to third and began battling hard to regain the lead. Stewart soon retired with mechanical problems, but Hulme kept hold of the lead. Bandini doggedly chased him lap after lap after lap after lap. The Italian tried in vain to overtake Denny Hulme. The laps ticked by, each one lap less for Bandini to make his move. By the second half of the race, it looked like Bandini was starting to slip. Pit mechanic Giulio Bazzari remembers team manager Franco Lini signalling frantically to Bandini, but getting no response from the driver. He was either so locked in that he wasn't able to see anything beyond the track right in front of him, or he was getting dangerously exhausted. And by lap 82, that exhaustion may have caught up with him. Exiting the tunnel section and barrelling down the straight towards the chicane de Port, Bandini's front left tyre clipped the guardrail going into the chicane. The car makes it through, but can't straighten up in time, and the Ferrari ploughs into the straw bales and steel bollards which line the harbour wall on the left side of the track. The petrol tanks are ripped open and the car explodes, the flaming Ferrari flipping over in the air and rolling onto its back, trapping Bandini underneath as it burns at the side of the track.
Now Bandini's crashed.
Good Lord, look at that.
The car, it looks like it's upside down, Phil. Tremendous fire. This is gasoline, remember, they use in these automobiles.
For a few seconds, nothing happens. Cars continue to speed past the burning wreckage as the race continues. Straw bales, now soaked in burning gasoline, catch fire and compound the blaze around the car. Finally, some people run up to try and free Bandini, and some fire hoses start spraying water from across the opposite side of the road, again whilst racing cars are speeding by. In these days there was no safety car, no way of communicating to the other drivers what had happened, and the race was rarely stopped anyway, no matter what it was that had happened. The marshals, dressed in just normal summer clothes, attempt to get close enough to sling some ropes over the chassis and flip the car over. But the fire continues to burn, fanned by the rotors of a TV chopper that was just flying overhead, filming the crash. Eventually the fire was doused and the unconscious Bandini was dragged clear. He was alive, but he was in terrible shape and was immediately rushed by boat across the harbour to Princess Grace Hospital. Bandini had third-degree burns over 70% of his body, at least 10 cracked ribs, an open chest wound, severe blunt trauma to the torso, and lung damage. He might have survived if he had been dragged clear straight away and he hadn't remained trapped under the burning car for 5 minutes. He never regained consciousness, and despite numerous operations, including having his spleen removed, he died 3 days later in the hospital. Inspection of the car showed that it had entered the chicane in 5th gear, effectively at top speed. Bandini hadn't shifted down for the chicane, and he didn't slow down when trying to make the turn. This photograph, taken just as he is about to hit the barrier, shows him seemingly looking to the right, not in front. Was he distracted? Exhausted? Was he looking for Denny Hume? We'll never know. Bandini's death didn't immediately set in motion a revision of safety standards, but it did pose some awkward questions and forced the racing community to have a long, hard look at safety provisions in the event of a crash like this. If, as the Monaco organisers maintained, the procedures had been followed, then why did the rescue effort resemble a pantomime, with folk running around all over the track while racing cars sped past? Why did nobody have any fireproof clothing? Why was there no firefighting equipment nearby? Why was a TV chopper allowed to hover overhead, fanning the flames while rescuers tried in vain to get close to the burning car? The communication was lousy. The marshals didn't even know where Bandini was. They spent time at first looking for him in the harbour waters, not realising that he was actually under the flaming car. It took some spectators shouting and pointing for them to realise that he was indeed still trapped in the burning wreck. 3 days after his death in Monaco, Lorenzo Bandini's funeral took place in the small town of Reggiolo in northern Italy. The scale of his funeral was enormous. Contemporary reports estimated that around 100,000 people attended, an astonishing number for a racing driver. It was more akin to a state funeral than a private service. This massive turnout reflected Bandini's popularity with ordinary Italian fans, and the belief that he had been on the verge of becoming Italy's next great Formula One champion. Many saw him as one of their own, a hard-working, down-to-earth, authentic Italian driver who made it to the top, who fulfilled his dream to drive for Ferrari. A man who should have been a world champion, but in the end, a man who instead ended up on the ever-growing list of racing driver fatalities.